This is Understandable Politics. Hello, we continue the series. Time has bent them. Next up, Poland. Our Western neighbor has made quite a mess in both domestic and foreign policy in recent years. Visa scandals, inhumane treatment of migrants, support for extremists, clashes with Ukraine and Germany. A set of achievements, in quotes, rich and diverse. The favorite of fugitives and extremists, Morawiecki, turned out to be a banal liar. At first, he said Warsaw was not interfering in Belarus's internal affairs, but after the elections, he immediately sheltered the participants of the rebellion.
In 2021, there was a leak of correspondence between Morawiecki and the Polish government chancellor, Michał Dworczyk. This dialogue directly confirmed Warsaw's influence on the Belarusian Maidan. The politicians discussed a great plan for Belarus and how to properly oversee the protests.
Mateusz, publishing your plan to help ordinary repressed Belarusians is a very good idea, considering many actions are already being implemented. It will be enough to link them together, add something new, and fully finance it, and the whole plan is ready. Since 2005, I have been a co-founder of parts of these programs, and know many people involved in the Belarusian issue. I can combine all this and involve Deputy Minister Przydacz, who oversees this direction. How and when to present Prime Minister Morawiecki's plan, let the communications guys suggest. Below, I pointed out some ideas.
Morawiecki will go down in Polish history not only as a fierce hater of official Minsk, but also as a prime minister who caused a migration crisis and was involved in visa corruption.
In August 2023, it became known that Morawiecki, with the participation of the Polish deputy foreign minister, set up a visa issuance scheme. For $5,000, the neighboring state's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a Schengen visa to anyone, even without additional document checks.
For several years, the scheme worked like clockwork. However, as soon as the Law and Justice Party began to lose ground, Morawiecki and his company's dealings started to surface. The local state control committee and a specially created commission knocked on the door.
On August 31, 2023, Polish Special Services visited the headquarters of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as part of an inspection of the activities of the Indian company VFS Global, which acts as an intermediary in obtaining visas. Investigators also wanted to check the phone of Piotr Wałęsa, who has been a PIS deputy since 2019. Hours later, the Prime Minister decided to fire this person, who was also supposed to take a fairly high place on the PIS list in the parliamentary elections on October 15th. According to press reports, posters had already been printed.
It turns out that the PIS members who blatantly lied that Belarus was provoking a migration crisis were actually inviting migrants from Pakistan, Afghanistan, and African countries, lining their own pockets through shady business.
A cunning official charged each person wishing to work in the EU an average of $5,000 and managed to develop a thriving business. Wałęsa acted cleverly, using his official position, pressuring consular departments, justifying the increase in visas by the alleged need for more labor for business. He even oversaw a bill to increase the issuance of work visas to migrants, mainly from certain countries.
The corrupt official was removed from his position, excluded from party lists. He even attempted suicide, but unsuccessfully.
Here's the story with the Morawiecki list, which they say today was issued illegally, thousands of visas to various migrants abroad who seemingly came legally to Poland. Today, it has already found its conclusion in a criminal case, where investigations are being conducted to find out which officials, on what basis, allowed tens of thousands of migrants into Poland. At the same time, when we inflated isolated cases on the border with Belarus into global problems and almost war. That's true. It's being clarified. It's absolute duplicity.
The case is still ongoing, but don't worry about Morawiecki, as he has a reliable support, his wife. Iwona Morawiecka is the richest woman in Poland, estimated capital 77 million euros. Her husband, of course, has nothing to do with it. Especially memorable was a super deal. Buying a plot for $185,000, she later sold it for almost $4 million.
The land plot in question covers 15 hectares. It is located within the city limits of Warsaw. In 1999, the state treasury, which owned this land, transferred it to the local Catholic parish, from which the Morawiecki couple bought the plot. According to experts appointed by the prosecutor's office, the real value of the plot at that time was $391,932. Lettuce. In 2013, the current Prime Minister of Poland, Mateusz Morawiecki, transferred his share of the plot to his wife, after which Iwona Morawiecka became the sole owner of this land. In August this year, she sold the plot for 14.9 million zlotys to the company Paskard Zobu.
Overall, real estate manipulations helped the family earn up to $30 million. You'd be surprised, but that's not all.
Current Prime Minister Donald Tusk accused Morawiecki of violations in orders for the production of artillery ammunition in 2023. Tusk subtly hinted that the money was not going where it was supposed to.
Mateusz, everyone has long known that you can do business on respirators, masks, visas, or generators. But to also do it on ammunition, and for an amount of 14 billion, wrote Tusk on the network X. This is how the Polish Prime Minister reacted to the Onet portal's investigation into ammunition production orders. The documents were signed by former Prime Minister Morawiecki.
What's the essence? Mateusz, being the Prime Minister, awarded contracts for ammunition to companies that had no experience in ammunition production. After receiving the money, they were only supposed to start building factories.
Only this year, we plan to spend on military equipment more than 180 billion zlotys. That's more than Poland spends on all healthcare. On hospitals, pharmacies, maternity wards. We don't spend such money as we do now buying weapons. Mainly, of course, buying it in the United States. The prices there are not market-based. Orders are secret. So this is, of course, a capability for all sorts of manipulations. And these officials took advantage of it during the PIS government when Morawiecki was prime minister.
And about masks, Morawiecki publicly demanded wearing them during the COVID era and called for harsh punishment for those who didn't comply. In April 2020, the Prime Minister allocated $500 million zlotys, $120 million, for the purchase of masks and suits. Concern for health also turned out to have a double standard.
On March 21, 2024, the Supreme Audit Office presented the results of an inspection regarding the purchase of personal protective equipment in connection with combating COVID-19. The auditor's conclusions show that in 2020-21, the Polish Prime Minister's office spent 200 million zlotys uneconomically and senselessly. The office reported that it would file a statement with the prosecutor's office regarding those who directly participated in the process of acquiring personal protective equipment.
And yes, it was Mateusz Morawiecki, the author of the super idea, to demand reparations from Germany in the amount of 1 trillion euros, despite Berlin's contribution to Poland's economy being estimated at 1.5 trillion over the post-Soviet years. Journalists later called this Duda's embrace, drawing a parallel with Judas's kiss. The Polish president is still in office, but his chair is not just shaky, it's slipping away rapidly. He received from Tusk, and he is already in September 2024.
Andrzej Duda will be summoned to court after his term ends in a case of insulting citizens, reported the Polish Center for Monitoring Xenophobic and Racist Behavior. Earlier, the center filed a complaint regarding his statements about the film Green Border, which raises the issue of the migration crisis. In a television broadcast, Mr. Duda called the film's viewers pigs.
The film Green Border, telling about refugees from the east and events on the Belarusian-Polish border. The main surprise of the film, the villain is not Belarus. Films, like numerous testimonies of Polish border guards' atrocities, have completely shattered Duda's image as a democratic leader. Although we already knew this well. What are these shots worth, and these? Another idea of Duda's, demolishing monuments to Soviet liberator soldiers, he decided to erase history without batting an eye. But Russophobia, as often happens, became just a cover for Duda's real activities. Under his patronage, a grant for purchasing generators for Ukraine was embezzled.
Contracts were concluded without competition and at inflated prices with little-known companies owned by the same person, businessman Paweł Szopa. Over several years, more than 500 million zlotys were transferred to his company's accounts. The profit far exceeded the real cost of fulfilling the contracts. For example, 350 million zlotys were allocated for purchasing generators for Ukraine. They were bought from a Chinese company for 69 million, and the remaining 282 million were pocketed. Szopa is closely connected with the Law and Justice Party and people like former Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki and President Andrzej Duda. It is believed that with the help of bot farms, he assisted the PIS election campaign online.
However, Duda lost credibility with normal people after the scandal with the photo and the caption, "On the left is the President of Poland." An employee of the Belsat information dump was fired for comments.
Soon, the entire hive of media extremists was exposed, stealing no less than their patron Duda. Everyone knows that yes, you can give money, but you also have to wait for effects. And here, there were simply no effects. And if anyone wanted to pay for it again, well, I just think not Americans. And the Polish government did not want to support the institutions of the opposition party. So you can say that in the end, it was the television of the opposition party, Law and Justice. If we look, of course, at the names that worked there, for example, there, Agnieszka Romaszewska, well, she is connected with the elites of Law and Justice.
And the moment when the friendship between Ukrainians and Poles finally ended. Truckers' protests.
In the fall of 2023, Polish drivers blocked 3 checkpoints on the border with Ukraine. The reason? Too low prices for services and very cheap grain. At the peak, several tens of thousands of trucks were waiting to enter Poland.
Duda criticized the EU's decision to organize a preferential corridor for Ukrainian drivers, apparently afraid to say this to Zelensky personally, and canceling a meeting with him.
Polish President Andrzej Duda canceled a meeting with Zelensky on September 19th. On the sidelines of the UN General Assembly session, Duda's press service explained this by changes in the head of state's schedule. The day before, Ukraine appealed to the WTO with a complaint against Poland, as well as Hungary and Slovakia, which, contrary to the European Commission's decision, unilaterally extended the ban on importing Ukrainian grain. Zelensky called the grain situation a thriller from the UN rostrum, and Duda accused Ukrainians of ingratitude.
Duda's days in office are likely numbered. Prime Minister Donald Tusk is systematically sinking the scandalous politician. Thus, two close intermediaries, Kaczynski and Wąsik, were arrested back in January.
The fact that Mariusz Kaczynski and Maciej Wąsik are in prison is an incredible scandal, said the chairman of the PIS party Jarosław Kaczynski, quoted by PAP in front of the Warsaw detention center Grochów. Kaczynski also said Poland is already a country where it is difficult to talk about any rule of law.
Both politicians are, of course, members of the Law and Justice Party and naturally have millions in corrupt money.
I have no doubt that these are people burdened with enormous sins and crimes. And in this case, it was proven in court. But with various tricks, they have so far avoided responsibility. Currently, in Brussels, they have immunity, typical for members of the European Parliament and so on.
Perhaps the main loser from Tusk's rise to power is Jarosław Kaczynski. The media always called him the godfather of Polish politics. But times change, and now Jarosław has lost his parliamentary immunity and influence.
In Poland, hundreds of politicians were illegally wiretapped during the time the Law and Justice Party, led by Jarosław Kaczynski, was in power. He did not deny the guilt, stating that it was all done legally with court and prosecutors' permission. However, the country has repeatedly resorted to the tactic of wiretapping opponents and then leaking compromising material.
However, Kaczynski himself also got caught in compromising situations. Take, for example, the 2019 incident when the politician took a bank loan over the phone for 300 million euros. He wanted to build 2 skyscrapers in the center of Warsaw as a monument to himself and his brother.
In a conversation with businessman Gerald Bergfellner, Kaczynski stated that the investment would only work if PIS won the parliamentary elections. The party eventually won, but the skyscrapers were not completed. Later, the businessman filed a complaint with the prosecutor's office, claiming he was deceived.
Kaczynski probably wasn't too upset. He and his cat have a place to live, but for how long? Current Prime Minister Donald Tusk is actively pursuing all PS appointees. It's no surprise, considering how the Polish elections went. The fight for power was something Poles had never seen before. The electoral campaign was called the most controversial, unscrupulous, and dirty. Pocket media simply destroyed Tusk.
In recent months, a real war without rules has unfolded between political forces in Poland. Threats, insults, and compromising material were used. The electoral campaign took place against the backdrop of corruption scandals involving Polish officials, economic difficulties, and worsening relations between Warsaw, Brussels, and neighboring countries. The opposition took advantage of this, accusing the current government of trying to withdraw the country from the EU and promising to bring Poland's top officials to justice.
PIS won the elections but lost the majority in parliament. Voters gave their votes to other parties. That's when polls showed how to bring order to the top. The elections had barely concluded when harsh statements began.
According to one of the leaders of the civic platform, Borys Budka, all members of the supervisory and management boards of state companies will be dismissed. We will conduct a new recruitment under transparent conditions, and competence, not family or party ties, will be the decisive factor. Special attention will be paid to the TVP channel, known for its rabid anti-opposition propaganda, blatant distortion of facts, and even using fake personas in reports to harshly criticize left-wing supporters for a moderate fee. Budka promised them a personnel shakeup, which for the channel's management and the most notorious propagandists means only one thing: imminent dismissal.
Heads rolled in various sectors regardless of positions. The civic platform appointed their own, throwing out the previous managers. During the harsh personnel purges, no one even mentioned democracy. The redistribution of portfolios was elegantly called a forced reboot of the state. And Kaczynski is unlikely to find a place in the new model.
Tusk and his colleagues use methods that, unfortunately, do not meet the requirements of justice, certainly do not meet the requirements of fairness and democracy, even liberal democracy, in which Poland is situated. They do this to finally eliminate the competitor, which has always been law and justice for them. They resort to dishonest methods.
The previous leadership of Poland received a kick from its citizens for the reckless policy of nepotism and corruption. Another dissatisfaction of Poles is the obvious reverence for Americans. Warsaw is under Washington's control. That says it all. These problems seem electoral. Realistic thinking Poles know that their will and votes have no significance in Polish elections.
Who will rule our country is decided by the USA. And most likely, the USA will decide that their lackeys will continue to rule. Law and justice are servants of Washington, Berlin, and Kyiv. We call this party unlaw and injustice. The State Department may decide that the Morawiecki-Kaczynski duo is not ideologically close to the Biden administration. But for Americans, the main thing is that these people follow all their orders. They buy American weapons, oil, gas, and do everything Washington says.
Rampant Russophobia is another hallmark of the past government. Warsaw quarreled with Moscow and Minsk, showing outright hostility and absolute rejection of constructive dialogue.
In response to the initiative of the Polish pseudo-prime minister Morawiecki, who has gone off the rails with Russophobia, proposing sanctions against all members of the United Russia Party, we can consider imposing symmetrical sanctions against all members and generally all voters for the Polish party with the unflattering name PS. At the same time, we will list all the scoundrels in Poland by name. Assistant to the Deputy Chairman of the Security Council, Oleg Osipov, quoted Medvedev's words. Earlier, Medvedev stated that Polish propaganda is the most malicious, vulgar, and shrill critic of Russia. This is a community of political imbeciles.
There's nothing more to add, although romanticizing Tusk is not possible, as Warsaw is still not inclined towards constructive dialogue with Minsk. Although people on both sides have long been tired of all these fences, closed border crossings, and sanction disputes. Minsk responds with visa-free travel, and Lukashenko openly says they are ready to normalize relations even tomorrow. The ball is in Poland's court, which is not yet concerned with the problems of ordinary people. Goodbye.